Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So in this one here, I wanted to do a video actually talking about Carl Grimes because I did a video the other day talking about, his possible return, or could he return anyways, in The Ones Who Live. And a lot of you guys actually really liked the idea, and there was a big response to it. So I wanted to give my thoughts on that and just, on the whole thing with Carl in general, because it's very interesting looking at the whole thing. It's been a long time, obviously, since he's been off the show, but the character really is so popular, and I really feel like killing the character off when they did really shows how much of a bad decision it is, considering how popular the character is still to this day. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get more Walking Dead content like this, and also if you haven't subscribed to my personal channel yet, I will leave a link down below in the description of this video. Thank you to everyone who did subscribe and all that, and obviously all the positive comments and all that on the video. I am working on the second video right now, so that should be out at some point, I'm guessing in the next couple of days, and obviously I'm working on like a very specific video right now, and that's going to take a little bit of time, probably another week or so I'm going to try to have another video come out just before that. But yeah, if you're interested, definitely go and subscribe. Now, I actually wanted to touch on one thing that I did just mention, which was, obviously the hate for, killing off Carl Grimes, and how much of a bad decision that is kind of in general, when, one thing that we do say a lot, or at least I do say a lot, is, I think it's very smart to kill off bigger characters sometimes. You can't just keep everyone alive forever, because otherwise it's just sort of, I don't know, you don't want your character to be, handled in a certain way like that. And like, because I would say, like, right now in the spinoffs, there are certain characters that I guess probably wouldn't be killed off, like Daryl and Carol in the Daryl and Carol spinoff. They're not going to be killed off at all, though they could die in the final season, right? But until that final season, they're probably not going to be killed off. Whereas I think that was very different in the final season of The Walking Dead. We knew they weren't going to die, and there was a lot of characters that were just never really ever going to be killed off. And there was a lot of criticisms about that overall with The Walking Dead. Ever since the beginning, they would kill off bigger characters here and there. There would always be these bigger moments, and then it got to the point that around season 7, 8, 9, it was like around there anyways, people started to complain about the fact that they weren't killing off like these bigger characters. Or I guess I would say it was a little bit before that. It was more in season 6, like season 5 and 6, they wouldn't kill off certain bigger characters. And again, looking back now, I don't think that's necessarily true, but I remember people complaining about that a lot back in the day. And after you kill off Glenn and Abraham, which was in the season 7 finale, or season 6 finale, but season 7 premiere, there were no big deaths really until Carl's death, and people were kind of complaining about that as well. Like, it was a very common complaint overall, and I've always been on like both sides of the argument. Like, I've always sort of understood both sides. Like, I kind of get it where you don't want to watch the show to have just like these big deaths. Like, you don't want to just like, you don't want the show to become that, where it's just all about these bigger deaths. And I will say The Walking Dead did become that. Like, it got to the point where it was so popular that people were just like, well, oh, it's the finale, or it's this moment, so there's going to be a big death. And people just expected it and kind of ignored the story and the plot, and were just more like, well, I don't know where it's going, but I just want to see this big death kind of thing. And it became this whole thing. And I think over time, back then I disagree with that a lot, but there were moments where I was like, you know what, you do need to kill off some bigger characters. And I think it wasn't necessarily because of the fact that the characters were, or that they weren't killing off bigger characters. It was more that the cast just got way too big, and they had to really like constantly have to split up screen time with everybody. And I think that's why the spinoffs are just a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, and why people like them. I mean, there's story stuff in the budget and all of that, but I also think just focusing on a couple of characters helps out quite a bit. Whereas, the final season of The Walking Dead, I don't even know how big the cast was, but it was insane. It got to the point where you had to ignore a bunch of characters, like just completely forget about them, because you need to focus on, some of the bigger characters and give their story, a proper ending kind of thing. And I just think that, in general, that's sort of my, I guess that has sort of been the, the idea. It's sort of been like, you can't kill off these bigger characters. And then when it came to Carl, they killed him off. They actually, they were like, yeah, we're going to kill off Carl Grimes, and they did it. And definitely a moment that people were very, very upset with. And, I guess I should ask the question to you guys, was that the moment, or was there moments before that, maybe kind of scared them off from killing off bigger characters? Because I almost want to say, when they killed off Glenn, that was the moment, but it just kind of felt like after Carl, that's where they did kind of Like they stopped with that a little bit. But in my opinion, personally, I think it wasn't necessarily that for Carl killing him off. I think it was just the character specifically. Like it was just that character. You could have killed off any other character there. A bigger character. A character I always talked about, you know, that you should have killed off in season 8 was Morgan. And I talked about this back in the day. I always said, like, Morgan's story during the All Out War arc was such a symbol for what All Out War was, you know, and just what he represented overall. Like, it was always, he always was the one with the debate of, like, should we kill or not kill kind of thing. And All Out War was really all about killing, and Carl's death basically turned Rick into thinking that, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't kill anymore kind of thing, right? I really feel like if Rick lost Morgan, he could have done the same thing. I really think that. And this way you're going into season 9, you know, a new beginning and all of that, and you're entering a new era of The Walking Dead. I think it would really work well because Morgan, to me, you know, could serve as like this certain chapter of Rick's life, right? Like, because he was such a big character in Rick's life. I mean, that's the thing that's kind of sad about it now is like he's out there looking for Rick, but like, are we ever going to see them together ever? Like, I would really like to actually see Rick and Morgan in a scene again because they go back so far, right? But it's just like, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. And Morgan being there in Rick's first episode, being the first person really that he ran into overall, and then obviously dying at the end of All Out War, I think would have worked perfectly. And Carl still could have been around to this day. And I think after doing that video the other day and sort of talking about, you know, could he return in The Ones Who Live, it was one of those things where I just kind of realized immediately, wow, Carl is still very popular. Like Carl is still a character that people are still kind of upset about, you know, the fact that he actually was killed off the show. Because, and I also think it's coming up a little bit right now too, because of where we're at right now with The Walking Dead. Like when the show was on, like the original series, I don't think people talked about it too much because, you know, you still had Judith, you were still in like this part and whatever in the story. But now that we're in the spin-off territory where we're going to be getting all these spin-offs and all these like multiple seasons and all that, I think people would really have loved a Carl spin-off. He's one of those characters that I really think could have kept The Walking Dead going on for a long time. And I'm not saying The Walking Dead can't go on for a long time, but like Carl for sure, I think would have kept the numbers staying a lot higher. And, you know, like after Glenn's death, I know a lot of people stopped watching. I know that was one part of the story where people were like, you know what, this is too much for me. I'm going to stop watching. For me, though, it was just, I think at that point, it was more of like, well, it wasn't just Glenn's death overall. Like, to me, you know, if you've watched any sort of slasher movies or anything at all, like, that was really nothing compared to that, or at least it was on par with that, you know? And I think the difference with Carl's death, though, is that it affected the story overall, right? Like, Glenn's death, it made sense. He died in the comic at that point. But Carl's death, it was like, okay, now you're affecting the overall story. Like, it really, really, like, it affected a lot because a lot of people wanted to see Carl grown up. And there was a lot of things early on that people really liked about, you know, like just the Rick and Carl story and the Grimes story and all of that. And I just think that choosing to kill that character off when they did, it really did mess up quite a bit of stuff. And that's why I do think, like The Walking Dead for sure one day is going to be getting a reboot. Like, it's going to happen at some point. Like, all popular franchises like this, like they never die. There's always going to be a reboot. There's always going to be something. And I do think that is going to be the big change right there. And I think that's what's going to be kind of fun about it, right? Like, whenever they do a reboot, whether that's 10 years, 20 years, or whatever, it's all the characters going to be recast. You know, the story will be different. And I think at that point, we're all going to be sort of questioning, you know, it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of go from season 1 to season 2 and being like, well, where are they going to end the story? Are they borrowing more from the comic or the original show? And what decisions are they going to make? You know, and once we get to season 8, I think the big one is going to be like, are they killing off Carl, right? Because killing off Carl, I think really just, it hurt the franchise really like overall. And again, just doing that video the other day, I didn't realize how popular of a character he was. And so that's why I do think he should make a return. You know, like there's a whole like negative, you know, feeling around Carl Grimes right now where it's like fans are upset and mad about it all. But I really feel like if you brought him back in The Ones Who Live and you did a really amazing like hallucination scene or like dream sequence scene or something like that, I think people would really, really be very, very happy about that because you would create some more positive buzz just around the character and that story. And I think it would just be honestly really incredible because I think the thing too, like people want to see Carl again in just any sort of way, right? Because like Carl, I think like if he would have survived, he definitely would have been a lead of his own show. For sure. He would have gotten that. Like he would have been a lead in his own show. It would have happened. And I think that if he were to return in The Ones Who Live, people would be so excited. And it would have to be a hallucination scene. I've been seeing so many comments, like, I mean, a lot of comments in my previous video of people saying that, well, it's okay if they killed him off. Like, you know, we technically never saw his death, and, you know, maybe they can just write it where it's a little different. And I'm like, I don't know about that. And a lot of people honestly were saying that, like, they were okay, like, totally, if they just had Carl come back somehow and, like, they just came up with whatever reason for it. For me, I wouldn't be okay with that. As much as I do want Carl to come back, I would not be okay with that, because it affects a lot of the story. And that's the thing about The Walking Dead and the main characters that they've done so well, is the realism behind everything. Whenever they've made a bad decision behind something, they handle it really well afterwards. And that's something that, like, Fear the Walking Dead never did. Fear the Walking Dead never handled anything like that. When they killed off Madison, they just made it worse. Bringing her back, they made it worse. Bringing back Troy, everything that they've done to bring back characters, they've just made everything so ridiculous and make no sense at all, right? Like, that's just been the thing with that show. But The Walking Dead, they've really done an amazing job making everything feel so real. And just, I wouldn't want them to bring Carl back, because there's no way that you could bring him back. Like, it would just make no sense. Like, Carl died there in front of Rick, and Rick buried him afterwards. In order for Carl to be alive, Carl would have had to have faked his death, basically, and Rick saw him die. Like, Carl would have had to have faked, like, everything, and then, like, you know, like, unbury himself from the grave, and then, like, go live a separate life for years and years and years. You know, it doesn't make any sense. It really does not make any sense. He died in season 8. It was a very tragic death, and I will talk about that moment more in depth. Like, I do have a video planned where I'm gonna go back and watch those 2 episodes, like episode 8 and 9 of season 8, and I'm gonna do an overall review talking about, you know, the legacy of Carl Grimes, and just the moment that Rick lost Carl, and how much that did affect him overall, and how much that sort of affected him to this day. So that video is going to be coming out very soon. I just kind of wanted to talk about this right now, because it was a very interesting subject. Honestly, it's very interesting seeing people, I guess, really want Carl to come back, and really at this point just, like, have him back for the sake of, like, you know, it doesn't matter if it affects the story in any way. I will say I wouldn't mind them doing, I don't want to say a soft reboot in any way, but if they were to do a reboot and say like 10-15 years or something like that, and they actually had the cast of The Walking Dead come back, but just say it was more focused on Carl this time, but they actually had Chandler Riggs come back, but it was more of a soft reboot of the original story where Carl didn't die. And maybe there were certain changes of things that would happen afterwards, but we would just get, like, references to that later on, where we would hear that Carl was involved in this during this arc kind of thing, but overall the story somewhat stayed the same. I think fans would like that, because people don't really mind soft reboots like that. Like, that does happen overall. It happens with a lot of franchises. So, yeah. But anyways, I'm gonna leave it here. Make sure to post all your thoughts down below. Would you like to see Carl come back in any way, or are you fine with the character sort of being gone at this point here? And also, how much did Carl's death in the show affect your viewing of the show overall? Hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.